How's it going, everyone? It's me, Deus. Today, I decided I was going to make a tier list on PvP patches in ESO. I was going to be ranking them from best to worst PvP that we've seen in the game. Now, I will preface this with two things. The first thing I'm going to say is this is specifically going to be for console and talking about the console updates, so it has nothing to do with PC or anything like that. And the reason why console specifically is because PC got some certain things that didn't apply to console. Like for example, in update 40, they got the population caps increased. That wasn't something that happened on console at all. As well as in, I believe, Stone Thorn patch, they also got an AOE test where Zos was trying to limit AOEs to see if that would help fix the lag that didn't happen on console. So that's why I'm separating PC and console, because PC got certain things that console didn't. So this is specifically going to talk about console. Now, with that out of the way, the next thing I want to preface is my knowledge for ESO doesn't include 1 Tamriel, unfortunately. I did not play during 1 Tamriel. I started in March of 2017, and because of that, I was only around for the Homestead patch. I think that's what it was at the time, which they updated housing and made housing better. But obviously, that didn't do anything for PvP, so it's not included here. But I was pretty much here for everything else besides 1 Tamriel. So I think I'm just going to go and put 1 Tamriel up in the best PvP tier, because I know how people talk about 1 Tamriel and they remember it so fondly and how great it was, you know, during the vet rank days. So I'm just gonna put 1 Tamriel in best PvP, but I didn't play it personally, so I can't say anything about it. I came literally right after. Um, Now the first tier, the first actual category I can talk about, Morrowind. Morrowind, I personally believe, was great for PvP. It had a lot of additions to PvP. It brought Warden, which was some new flavor into the game, new class. It also brought in Battlegrounds. Although Battlegrounds at this time wasn't free to play, it was a pay to play feature. You needed Morrowind in order to play Battlegrounds at the time, but it was way better than the current BGs. It allowed you to use CP for one, and it had a lot more flavor things inside of it. Like, for example, it had power sigils, where you could pick up a sigil in the middle of a fight and it would boost your stats or whatever. Kind of similar to how there are power sigils in the arenas, which is unfortunately a feature that doesn't exist in the game anymore. But at the time, it was pretty great. It was pretty fun. Morrowind, I think, was a great patch. I don't know if I would say it's the best PvP, but it was pretty great. It gave us an entirely new feature of BGs, and it gave us a new class. It was a lot of fun to go around. So I think I'm gonna say A tier for Morrowind. Now the next tier is for Horns of the Reach. I'm going to put Horns of the Reach in the hot garbage tier. Now, the reason why Horns of the Reach is just going to go straight to the bottom is because after Morrowind, there was a whole slew of bugs introduced into the game. A lot of the bugs made PvP completely unbearable. Um, as you can see with Horns of the Reach, I kind of, instead of putting the actual graphic that they made for it, I just put the Cyrodiil loading screen, because that's pretty much the highlight of Horns of the Reach. Horns of the Reach had insane loading screens in the game. You can actually look up a video. I think the name of the video is like ESO Plus 30-minute loading screen by Titanium Dust. It's literally 30 minutes of him being stuck in a loading screen. And that was literally the highlight of Horns of the Reach. Like, there were a bunch of other bugs, but there was just infinite loading screens that would never stop. The loading screens were so bad, there would be times where castles would flip to another faction, and after it flips to another faction, you would get hit with a loading screen. So everybody would immediately get stuck in a loading screen after a keep flips, and The only real solution was to close the game and reopen it, because it was quicker to close and reopen the game than it was to sit through the loading screen. That's how bad it was. Horns of the Reach was horrible. You would have like a 30-plus man fight, and then half of the fight will suddenly be standing still because everybody was loading screened. And it was pretty horrible for PvP for that reason. Actually, matter of fact, I'm going to go and put Clockwork City in the hot garbage tier as well. I gave it the exact same picture as Horns of the Reach, the Citadel loading screen, because the exact same problem persisted from Horns of the Reach into Clockwork City. The exact same thing happened. They had infinite loading screens. Now, honestly, Clockwork City was slightly better than Horns of the Reach because it introduced transmutes into the game, and that was like one of the biggest quality of life features for PvP. Because before, when it came to gear, you would have to grind gear. You had to grind the specific weapon as well as the specific trait. So you'd have to hope that your RNG works for you to give you both the weapon you want and with their specific trait. But with Clockwork City, they brought in transmutes, and you could just use transmutes and change it to the trait that you wanted. That was a huge change, and that made PvP builds a lot better, and damage got a lot better, and builds got more optimized. But I don't think I can reasonably give Clockwork City higher than the lowest tier, because it had the same issue of infinite load screens. What good is getting optimized builds if you're going to be stuck in a load screen for 90% of the time? So yeah, Clockwork City and Horns of the Reach are both bottom tier. Next is Dragon Bones. Now, I don't remember anything substantial happening during Dragon Bones. I think it was mostly a nothing patch. I think the PvP was fine. Nothing good, nothing bad happened. So I'm going to give it C tier, I think. Yeah, middle of the pack, because I don't think anything substantial happened in Dragon Bones. Now, Somerset. Somerset was almost a great patch, almost perfect. It was almost perfect. It was similar to Morrowind in the sense that Somerset added a lot to the game. It added in jewelry crafting, and now you can actually craft the jewelry that you want instead of having to go and just grind out jewelry, get it to drop. Now you can actually craft the jewelry, which helped PvP builds a lot. And it added in Sigic, which added a lot of skills into the game. It was a really great time for PvP, a lot of new skills and whatnot. However, there was one big blemish on Somerset that made Somerset not perfect, and that was the proc set slowed semblance. It was a proc set that procced off of any type of damage, and it had a 10% chance of putting a Oblivion damage dot on your enemy, and it hit really hard. And the main issue is the fact that it procced off any damage, and it's just Oblivion damage as damage over time. And that was like the most oppressive thing at the time, and everybody in PvP was using slowed. I want to say that Somerset is probably an A tier patch. Were it not for that one big blemish of slowed semblance existing, it was near perfect. It's on the same level as Morrowind. So I think A tier is fine for Somerset. After that was Wolf Hunter. I want to say Wolf Hunter was similar to Somerset. We just got to experience all of the fun of Somerset, except there was no slowed semblance, because they had just nerfed slowed in that patch. So we didn't have any of those procs taking over PvP at the time. So Wolf Hunter was just Somerset without any of the proc. So it was fun. Wolf Hunter was great. After Wolf Hunter, I want to say the next one was Murkmire. Murkmire. That was the classic patch where they wanted to nerf. They wanted to add cast times onto damage shields, I recall, specifically on the sorcerer shields. But instead of doing that, they ended up just capping mag sorc shields to like 50% of their health. Murkmire was mostly a good patch. However, I do recall that's the patch that they added in the destructive mile gates and bridges into the game. And honestly, I will never forgive that. That was a horrible addition into the game. Destructive mile gates and bridges. There's really no reason for that to exist except to just stop PvP from happening on the map. That's the only thing that destructive mile gates and bridges encourages. You just sit in front of a gate and you siege the gate or you brick the bridge and make sure that people don't cross it. It just hinders PvP, and the last thing you want in a PvP zone is to make PvP difficult. And Murkmire did that. So I want to say either C or D for Murkmire. Maybe C. Yeah, I think C. After that was Wrathstone. I think Wrathstone was mostly fine. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to move Dragonbones up. Dragonbones was better than Murkmire. And Wrathstone was similar, I think. Wrathstone was a fine patch. There was no issues that I can recall. I think it was mostly a fine patch. So B tier I think is comfortable for Wrathstone. Elsewhere is the next one. Now Elsewhere. Now I have a love-hate relationship with the Elsewhere patch. Elsewhere introduced Necromancer into the game, and that completely shook up PvP. It was a great addition to PvP. It was super fun for PvP when it came out. However, Elsewhere had a million bugs associated with it. They broke the group finder. Battlegrounds. You legitimately could not queue in for Battlegrounds because the activity finder did not work during Elsewhere at all. And yeah, also Elsewhere was the patch where they introduced Volendrung into the game, which was another horrible addition to the game. Volendrung. Now, the reason Volendrung was introduced into the game was because people in PvP were claiming that there was too many times during PvP where it was stale or boring and nothing was happening. So Volendrung was the answer to that. It was to keep PvP dynamic. Whenever it drops, everybody wants to go and grab Volendrung and go wreck stuff with it. Now, Volendrung, as interesting as it was as a concept in keeping the map active, it just encouraged faction stacking. Everybody, the entire server just wants to go and grab Volendrung. It was horrible. It was horrible for performance. It was not an amazing addition. Maybe C tier for Elsewhere. Yeah, I think C tier for Elsewhere. It had so many bugs, Volendrung, and the best part of it was the addition of Necromancer. After that was Scalebreaker. Now, I have a controversial opinion. I think Scalebreaker was actually a great patch. And the reason I say that is because it had a lot of quality of life updates for PvP, and it fixed a lot of issues. Like, this is the patch where they limited vigor healing to the caster of the ability. Before, stamina users could just use vigor as an AoE heal, and they could stack vigors on top of each other, and it healed for quite a bit. That's the patch that they changed it to single target, which was a pretty great change. And on top of that, they buffed Magicka Detonation and its morphs. I think during that patch they specifically removed the cap on Magicka Detonation, and they made it so that it would just infinitely ramp up in damage the more players was caught by Magicka Detonation, which was great. It was a great way to keep big Zergs in line, because now Magicka Detonation has no cap on it, which means you can one-shot Zergs if too many people are there. That was great. And they also changed Rally as well. They turned Rally into a burst heal, which was great. There's just a lot of great changes in Scalebreaker. It wasn't perfect though. I want to say Scalebreaker is A tier. Then after that was Dragonhold. I think Dragonhold was an okay patch. Not a lot happened. It was mostly fine. I think B tier for that. I don't recall anything substantial happening during Dragonhold. It was mostly okay. Now, Harrowstorm. Now, with Harrowstorm, I don't remember, but I think Harrowstorm was the patch where they did some funky changes with animation canceling. Like, animation canceling was one of the bigger skill gap things when it comes to PvP. I think Harrowstorm was the patch where they started updating it, kind of. I think it was block canceling and I think it was block canceling at the time. Yeah, they had done something to block canceling or just animation canceling in general. It was kind of a weird update. If I'm sure somebody in the comments will tell me. I think it was Harrowstorm that they started messing with animation canceling. But for PvP wise, I think it was mostly fine. Give it a B tier. Yeah, B tier. Even though they did mess with it, I don't think it deserves C tier. I think some of the patches coming up probably are more deserving of C tier than Harrowstorm was. Um, Greymore. Now, Greymore was a very, very interesting patch because Greymore introduced mythics and antiquities, and specifically, it introduced the Malakath Band of Brutality. And the original Malakath, before it got nerfed, gave you 25% damage done, but it completely removed your ability to deal critical damage. And that was a huge game changer because Malakath made an entire line of stat irrelevant. It made critical and critical damage irrelevant, as well as critical resistance. It completely ignored that entire stat line because critical was disabled while you had it equipped. And because of that, the usage or the necessity of impin fell down a lot because of that. And because of that, we saw a lot of damage in that patch. So with Greymore had a lot of procs going around because Malakath could affect procs, and there were a lot of proc builds going around using Malakath to buff their procs and whatnot. Overall, though, it was a high damage meta. Like, a lot of people had high damage. It wasn't just procs, just builds in general had tons of damage because of the Malakath band. It's very iffy. You had a lot of. I'm gonna put Malakath. I'm gonna put Greymore in probably. It's either B or C. I don't think it's B. I think it's. I'm gonna put Greymore in C. Just because it was super proc heavy. That's when it first started. Now, Stone Thorn. Stone Thorn was the exact same as Malakath. It was the exact same as Greymore, where Malakath took over everything. Everybody was still running Malakath. There was tons of damage going around, tons of proc builds going around. But at least a lot of people were dealing damage themselves. I remember seeing tank builds that could deal tons of damage because of the Malakath ban. So I feel Stonethorn was the same as Greymore. Although there was tons of proc builds, at least damage was high at a baseline. So you didn't have to resort to using procs. Procs weren't the be-all, end-all. There was way to get damage just through actual damaging skills. So maybe C as well with Greymore. I think that's fine. Markarth was the next patch. Markarth was probably the start of the horrible patches. I'm gonna give Markarth a D tier. Markarth was way worse than Greymore and Stonethorn, so I think it makes sense for Markarth to go D. Now, with Markarth, I put a picture of a werewolf because that was the highlight of the Markarth patch, was werewolves. That was the patch where werewolf took over PvP, specifically Crimson Twilight werewolves, because Crimson Twilight released during the Stonethorn patch, For those of you that don't know, that's when Crimson Twilight came out. Um, but it wasn't until Markarth that everybody was running a Crimson Twilight werewolf. There were like 40, 50k health werewolves running Crimson Twilight that could still do damage because of the Malakath band. That was probably the worst that Malakath ever got. And the PvP was horrible because everybody was using Crimson, not just werewolf. It got to a point where people were so sick of Crimson Twilight werewolves, you just saw regular builds using Crimson Twilight. Regular damage builds were using Crimson Twilight just because of how it was. Now, damage was still relatively high on the same level with Greymore and whatnot, but people were just too tanky because of Crimson Twilight. It was bad. Procs, it was literally a procalypse. Every fight had a Crimson Twilight user. It was not a good patch, so it has to go D, I think. But it wasn't the worst that we've ever seen, but I think D was fine for Markarth. And next is Flames of Ambition. I'm going to put Flames of Ambition in the best PvP tier. Now, Flames of Ambition came at a very interesting time. They had just started the no proc PvP test at the time. No proc had just begun. And on top of that, that was soon after they reset the CP system. I believe. Yes, they reset the CP, not reset the CP system, they introduced a new CP system. We went from CP 1.0 to 2.0. And because of that, it was pretty much like a complete shift into a new game. It felt like a complete reset. Everybody was trying to figure out the new CP system, what was good CP, what was bad CP. So it literally felt like a complete reset. And the fact that no proc was going on, people couldn't use any more of those cheesy proc sets. There was no more high health werewolves. There was no more procs everywhere because procs were disabled in Cyrodiil at the time. And everybody was starting completely fresh with the CP system. So it was amazing. It was amazing because it felt like everybody was completely starting over on a fresh slate. Flames of Ambition was great. It's definitely up there with one Tamriel, I'd say. And then after Flames of Ambition, we had Blackwood. I'm gonna say Blackwood was D tier. Now, with Blackwood, I put a picture of the mechanical acuity proc because that was the highlight of Blackwood, was mechanical acuity. Because no proc was going on in the patch before Flames of Ambition, all the bombers and whatnot were non-existent. They had left Cyrodiil, they were going into Battlegrounds or Imperial City where procs still worked, and they were bombing there because they couldn't bomb Cyrodiil anymore. However, when Blackwood started, everybody came back. All the bombers came back. There were so many bombers in PvP and so many mechanical acuity users in PvP. It was insane. However, I think the only silver lining with Blackwood was they had just nerfed the Malakath ban. They changed it to 16% damage done, and you reduce your critical damage by 50%, which is, it counters your base critical damage. So it nerfed the Malakath, but it brought back every single horrible proc that we had just gotten rid of. And every bomber was back in full force at that point. And they were all using mechanical acuity. It was horrible. So, oh, and I almost forgot. That was the patch where they completely broke the voice chat, the proximity chat on console. I remember. Proximity chat before only lets you talk with people of your faction, and they broke the proximity chat where you could talk to anybody on any faction. So you would have times where people were screaming down their mics at each other on a different faction and crap talking each other. It was very, very interesting. I want to say the proximity chat was probably the best point of Blackwood. Honestly, it was funny talking to people on other factions. So I want to say that's what held up Blackwood, was the fact that they bugged the proximity chat. Oh, and by the way, still to this day, the proximity chat is broken in Battlegrounds. They never fixed that. While they did fix the proximity chat in Cyrodiil, Battlegrounds is still broken. If you queue into a battleground, you can talk with people that are in a battleground that's completely different from you. It's never been fixed. It's still broken to this day on console. I don't even know if Zos remembers that bug anymore. But the next patch was Waking Flame. Waking Flame was horrible. It's hot garbage. Um, for the Waking Flame, I put like a low res picture of the Dark Convergence on the death recap because that's pretty much what Waking Flame was. Waking Flame was dominated by 3 proc sets. It was dominated by Dark Convergence, Plague Break, and Hrothgar's Chill. All 3 were pretty fucking horrible for PvP. Specifically Dark Convergence and Hrothgar's Chill. Hrothgar was horrible because you could get nuked just because of the fact that some random tank was hanging around you. It actually made Battlegrounds pretty unplayable during Waking Flame because there were so many tanks queuing in for Battlegrounds because they wanted to go and hold down a flag or go capture the Chaos Ball and not die while holding the Chaos Ball. But those players were actively making it harder for their teammates because they were 40k health with max resistances and they were just nuking their teammates. You would take like 10k to 20k Hrothgar's Chill because of the random tank that queued into your BG. It made BGs unplayable. It made open world Cyrodiil unplayable. Dark Convergence would one-shot you. If you were in a large group, you would get eviscerated. Dark Convergence at that time was way stronger than Proximity Detonation, a literal Zerg-busting skill. Dark Convergence was way stronger than that. And Dark Convergence on its own was enough to kill one person. Like, you'd take a 15k Dark Convergence if you were standing in it by yourself. And to think that skill, that set would scale up the more people caught in it. It was horrible. There was not a single fight without Dark Convergence. That was a horrible patch. So, hot garbage. And after that is Deadlands. Now, I personally have a love-hate relationship with the Deadlands patch because Deadlands buffed my 2 favorite and 2 most played classes, which is Dragon Knight and Nightblade. Both classes got buffed during that patch, which was great and fun for me. However, I don't think I could feasibly give Deadlands higher than a hot garbage tier. And the reason I say that is because during the Deadlands patch, they introduced a horrible, horrendous bug into the game with siege weapons. If anyone fired a siege weapon near you, it would crash your game. And because of that, for like, I want to say a full month of Deadlands, Cyrodiil was empty because you couldn't take any castles, you couldn't do any PvP, because anytime somebody sat down a siege weapon and fired it, your game would crash. Everybody was crashing. I distinctly remember there was one time I was AFK. I was AFKing inside of a keep, and my game just suddenly crashed because I guess somebody shot a siege weapon outside the keep while I was inside of it. So if you were just in proximity of a keep, you would crash because somebody shot siege weapons. Deadlands was only a good patch if you were like an open field fighter. It was fun for that. You could get a lot of open field fights because that's the only place you would find people. Nobody would be inside of a castle out of fear of the game crashing. But that's if you found anybody to fight in the first place, because every single PvP zone was empty during Deadlands because nobody wanted to play because of the crashing bugs. So I don't think I can give Deadlands higher than hot garbage, because what good was the changes to the classes at the time if you just were constantly crashing because of siege weapons? And then the next patch was Ascending Tide. I have a love-hate relationship with Ascending Tide as well. Ascending Tide was almost a good patch. However, it wasn't for the fact that everybody became a healer during that patch. As you can see here, for the picture of Ascending Tide, I put the ability Radiating Regen, because that's the skill that took over PvP. Everybody was using Radiating Regen during this patch. Everybody had a restoration staff on their back bar. Everybody became pseudo healers. It became infinitely harder to kill people because everybody could heal each other now, because they hybridized everything. Everything got hybridized, both offensive and defensive skills. Because of that, everybody was running restoration staff and healing each other. So while damage was great and build variety was great because you could use so many new skills now, everybody was healing each other, and that made PvP horrible. So I don't know whether to give it really high or really low, because it was great for damage, but it was horrible because it was super tanky. Maybe I'll give Ascending Tide. I'll put it C. I think. I think it's on the same level as the Malakath meta, so I think C tier for Ascending Tide. It's either C or B. I would think. I don't think it's that good for B tier. And then after that was High Isle. Now, looking back at High Isle, I remember when it came out, I low-key hated High Isle PvP because everybody was running the same gear. Everybody was using the Oak and Soul Ring. Oak and Soul Ring was literally just an upgraded version of the Malakath band. It had the same. Actually, now that I think about it, it's an upgraded version of the Malakath band, but without the procs, because you couldn't feasibly make a proc build work the same way you could with Malakath. So High Isle was just high damage, but without the procs. So honestly, High Isle might have been better than Greymore. I honestly want to give High Isle B tier, honestly, because it was better than the Malakath meta because damage was high naturally, and there wasn't as many procs going around. However, there was one bad thing about High Isle, and that was the fact that while damage was super high, because the Oak and Soul Ring gave you so many buffs, you also had people that could make builds that would never die as well. Like there's people making permanent corrosive armor builds where they just would take no damage and be able to deal tons of damage to you. So while damage was high, there were also people that could stalemate fights forever. So I want to say it was better than the Malakath meta and Ascending Tide's healing meta. So maybe B tier for High Isle. I hated it when it first came out, but looking back on it, it wasn't that bad because at least damage was high. And people were actually killing each other with skills and not procs during that time that I can recall. So maybe B tier for High Isle. And then Lost Depths. Lost Depths was pretty bad. It's either C or D. I don't recall if Lost Depths was the patch where they nerfed dots. I think that was that patch. I'm pretty sure Lost Depths was the patch where they nerfed dots. So things became a lot more tanky. It became difficult to kill things. Actually, I'm going to put Lost Depths in D because they also buffed Vigor and they gave Vigor minor resolve and increased the healing on it, which is why I put Vigor's picture here because that's like the defining thing was Vigor. Damage was down a lot. Everybody was tankier because of Vigor. Everybody had minor resolve now, and they nerfed dots. So damage was low. After we came from a high damage meta, we went to a low damage meta, a procky meta, or not a procky meta, a tanky meta. Oh, and I remember that is the patch that they put in Mara's Balm. I remember that also contributed to it being tanky because everybody was using Mara's Balm and everybody would never die in a fight because Mara's Balm kept purging negative effects off of you and also giving you a big heal. I totally forgot about Mara's Balm. I definitely can't put it C tier because Mara's Balm took over PvP. It was a proc. Super proc heavy metas I don't think should go super high up. Damage was already low without Mara's Balm, and then Mara's Balm was a thing as well, so Lost Depths is pretty bad. And then after that was Firesong. Now, Firesong was the patch where they actually nerfed, or they changed how the Emperorship worked. You would lose your Emperor bonus depending on how many Emperor keeps you had. So the less Emperor keeps you had, the less health you would get for that, which I think that was a good change because it encouraged people. It reduced the amount of high health you had in PvP, which is good. I think the Emperorship change was good, and it made it so that the Emperor faction would actually have some downsides to it, because usually the Emperor faction is the faction that's dominating PvP. So they would get all the bonuses and they'd get high health because of Emperorship, and that actually knocked down Emperorship a peg. So that was a good thing with Firesong. However, everybody during Firesong was a Warden at that patch. Everybody was playing Magic Warden, specifically Ice Warden. I think it was Lost Depths that they buffed Magden, the Mag Warden, and they gave them their passives or whatever to increase the damage with Ice Staff and whatnot. But that patch we saw tons more Wardens come in than during Lost Depths, and they could actually hurt you. Firesong was better than Lost Depths, though. It still had some of the tanky issues, but it was better than Lost Depths. I'm gonna say C tier, I think, for Firesong. Yeah. Now, Scribes of Fate. That patch was horrible. As you can see with the icon, I put the little icon for the Trifocus passive because that was the highlighting thing of Scribes of Fate. Because during Scribes of Fate, everybody started running heavy attack builds. Everybody's running heavy attack builds because the Trifocus passive was bugged, and it had a bug to where if you heavy attacked a NPC, that Trifocus passive for Lightning Staff dealt 100% of that damage to nearby targets. So you could heavy attack an NPC in open world Cyrodiil or in Imperial City, and the NPC would take PvE damage and apply that to PvP players. It completely went around Battle Spirit. You're not supposed to take the same damage in PvP as you do in PvE. That's why Battle Spirit exists. But Scribes of Fate, people were completely going around that with the Trifocus passive, and they were doing 20k plus heavy attacks. There's videos of people getting nuked because of some random NPC nearby that they were heavy attacking. I remember there's a video of Molag Bal down in Imperial City getting heavy attacked and somebody completely nuking a group just by heavy attacking Molag Bal. That was horrible patch. Honestly, I'm going to say Scribes of Fate was hot garbage because that PvP was hardly PvP. That was just PvE. Everybody was PvEing at that time. They were targeting NPCs, and then that was just killing players at the same time. It was hardly a PvP patch. It was mostly people PvEing and PvP. So I think hot garbage was good for Scribes of Fate. And then Necrom. Necrom was an okay patch, I think. Yeah, I think Necrom was okay. C tier. It brought in Arcanist, and we saw more high health builds coming in because of the Arcanist and their shield builds. I want to say C tier is probably fine for Necrom because that patch brought way more high health players into the game. More people were running high health. You had people that could barely die because the Arcanist had that strong shield that scaled off of health, and people were nuking you with the Tide, the Sanctum of the Abyssal Sea ultimate, stacking 50 to 60k health. I think high health metas can't go super high up on the list. Yeah, Necrom wasn't great, and there was a lot of procs that came out, or a lot of procs that are being used during Necrom as well. So probably C tier, I think. I don't think it was D tier bad, but Necrom wasn't great. C tier, I think, is fine for that. Now, update 39. Update 39 was a lot like Necrom, but probably worse. I put the picture of Shadowy Disguise here from the Nightblade skill line because that was like the highlight of update 39. That's when they buffed Cloak by giving it passive crit, giving it crit passively for having it slotted, on top of the fact that you get a guaranteed crit out of stealth. So a lot of people started playing Nightblade during this patch. There were tons of Nightblades, tons of gankers. Maybe D tier. Maybe D tier. I think D tier is fine. I feel like update 39 was a lot like Necrom, just a worse version of Necrom. Probably D tier. Yeah, I think D tier. And then update 40, which is the current patch. This patch is horrible. Now, update 40, you take pretty much every grievance I've had for every every patch down below, and it just like culminates into one thing. Um, Obviously, with this picture here in the background, I put elemental susceptibility, skill, and rending slashes here because that's the identifying thing of this patch. Everybody's using elemental susceptibility and rending slashes with a bunch of other procs like Marsalok, Scavenging Maw, uh, Way of Fire. This is a super proc heavy meta. It's not a good meta. Everybody's using procs. Every single fight has procs in it, and everybody has high health. Everybody has high health. It's one of the worst PvPs we've ever had. Like, at least during some of the other proc heavy metas, people weren't having high health as well. You have high health builds that are using procs at the same time. So everybody's using procs, everybody's high health. It's hard to kill people, and update 40 is just, it's honestly trash. Maybe not on the same level as these. Now that I think about it, I don't know if update 40 is on the same level as these because these had glaring issues that were completely different from D tier. Yeah, I think D tier makes sense for update 40 because you can't compare update 40 to some of these. Some of these had game breaking bugs and glitches and exploits going on. Update 40, while bad, I don't think it's on the same level. But yeah, I think D tier is going to be the end for that. And yeah, that's it. Now we're caught up to the current patch. I think I'm okay with this current tier list. I think it's fine. Um, Let me know you guys' thoughts on the tier list. And yeah, like the video if you liked it, and dislike it if disliked it. And that's about it.